Good morning to all. Thank you for joining me in this week's Motivating Monday. In the liberty that has been given to me in selecting a topic, I've decided to speak on this: living with the reality of Christ. Actually, on the surface, this short devotion today is nothing that you never heard before. But just as Paul said in 2 Peter 1 verse 12, which highlights to some extent the limitations of us humans. Wherefore I will not be negligent to put you always in remembrance of these things, though ye know them, and be established in the present truth. And in the same way, living or to live with the reality of Christ is a very simple concept to understand. But in application, it is not always easy because we are pulled in many directions when we can be distracted by many things. But this affects us every day in our every single choice in our daily life. Hence, the importance of this simple phrase and exhortation for me to live with the reality of Christ. And I hope in the same way it might encourage or motivate you. Actually, we do this every week. In fact, we did it yesterday. 1 Corinthians 11 verse 24. Do this in remembrance of me. This meaning the partaking of the Lord's Supper, which consists of the unleavened bread, which is to remember the death of Christ, and the fruit of the vine, to remember the implications of that death on our life, how we are now under new covenant, living in that reality. Not only that Christ died, or not only that Christ walked on the earth, not only that Christ died on the cross, but also that Christ resurrected from the dead. And when we truly believe this reality, it changes how we live. I think God in His infinite wisdom was so wise in having Christ institute the Lord's Supper and to partake of it every first day of the week, because it is such a central reminder to us, an ultimate declaration of God's grace, love, mercy to mankind, and also the greatest example of Christ in absolute submission, obedience, faith, that even in the worst of physical and mental torment, He did not yield. He loved, He obeyed, He had faith, He endured for us. That we remember this weekly, as we are commanded to do this together as saints. But it isn't all that bad to keep this reality in our lives daily, to meditate and chew on it constantly as well. Because it is by this faith which we live our lives as Christians, which is really the central theme of the Bible, all the way from Genesis to Revelations. And so some thoughts for consideration as we remember the reality of Christ today. I can't cover much in a short time, but I urge you just to recount and read the crucifixion accounts when you have time throughout the week. And as we read, consider that these were eyewitness, first-hand testimonies. Consider the details written in each respective account of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and how it all works together to paint the picture of the whole situation, from the institution of the Lord's Supper in the Last Supper to Jesus' fervent and agonizing prayer in the garden, to his very deeply unjust trial, to his conviction and crucifixion. And we also read the undeniable death and hanging on the cross. And we also get to know how each player reacted to the situation: the Jews, the soldiers, the women, the disciples. And we also read through how Jesus was buried in the tomb. But even as we read, these dark chapters, right, the glory of God is manifested. As we also read of how the angel asked the woman who went to tend to Jesus' body, why seek the living with the dead? Why seek the living with the dead? So let's meditate on the reality of Christ, on the reality of the things which are recorded so plainly and irrefutable for us to see, on so many levels, being a central part of our faith that's in us and important to our Christian walk. That just as how the disciples went running, scattered, fearful, even denying Christ, they came back transformed after seeing how the Savior lived, how he is risen, after seeing his nail-scarred hand, which further solidified their conviction in all that Christ has said and done all throughout his life. That like as Christ, they were also able to carry that conviction to their deaths. And so we too, in a very similar way, ought to be transformed because we share this same reality with the disciples back then, and really with every single Christian, with every single person that carries this name Christian, grounded in this reality. So let's live in this reality. Let our actions show that we are one with hope, we are one with purpose, we are one with direction. Let our actions show that Christ, our Savior, is well and alive. Let our actions show that we are dead to sin, dead to living life without the consideration of God. And instead, the life we live by very certain faith of the Son of God who loved us and gave himself for us. Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. Live with the reality of Christ. When we decide to go down in baptism, we proclaim this. So let's not forget our first love. And let us proclaim this in every aspect of our life as long as we live. Live with the reality of Christ. Thank you, and thank you for joining the Motivating Monday today.